Jones, and welcome to my last electronic poster for psychology. So, this week's topic was implicit association tests. So, after doing a little research, I figured out a few things about these tests. So, for the top, I put implicit association tests have been used for finding automatic biases, but they aren't always reliable. And as my subtitle down here, I put that using my own findings and research, I conclude that IATs are not as reliable or valid as people may perceive them to be. So you may be wondering, what is an implicit association test and what is its general purpose? The implicit association tests, or also called the IATs, is a test used to measure the strengths of associations in an indirect way. It measures the ease of behaviors and attitudes towards a certain group of people. The IAT can bring attention to attitudes that are made towards groups and help people reflect on those behaviors and attitudes. It can also provide a general basis for studies and psychologists. There are different methods that psychologists use for IATs, but it's actually quite simple. The experimenter chooses a topic, and for example, in this presentation, we will use gay versus straight people. The test tries to make responses easier when words or pictures are closely related and share the same response keys. For example, on your keyboard, the letter E and I will be used for gay or straight or good or bad words. And you determine, and trying to do it as fast as you can, you try to determine the words as they flash on the screen or pictures. With these responses, psychologists would be able to conclude that a person has a preference for straight over gay if they complete the task faster when straight is associated with good words and gay is associated with bad words, and vice versa. So, for results, I found this graph as an example, and it actually is used for one of the tests. It's based on the European and African American test for the IATs. So, as you can see, the majority of the results have a preference for European Americans over African Americans, ranging from little to strong automatic preferences. Up here, you can see that the majority either have little to no or strong preference on European Americans over African Americans. And that's just an example of the results that they conclude through these IATs. So, panning over to my results before the discussion, I chose to do 3 completely different tests. I chose to do the career correlating with gender, the age, and the Native versus White Americans test. Excuse me. Starting with the gender and career test, my results were moderate automatic associations to males with careers and females with families. 32% of other participants scored those same results, with the majority being similarly biased, which means that I associate career terms or occupations more with males than I do with females, and I associate family, vocabulary, or pictures with females. I agree strongly with these results because I was raised with my mom being more family oriented than my dad, so I was exposed to that belief from a very young age. My mother was always someone who put family before work, while my dad was the complete opposite, which is why I believe that my unconscious mind really does interpret family and careers in a gender-oriented way. Even though as I grow up to be a woman in society, I am closely relating women to careers. My second test that I took was age. My results showed strong automatic preference for young people over old people. In fact, 77% of participants preferred young over old, ranging from slight to strong preferences. That can result from a lot of different things, like the age of the people taking the tests and what they actually are perceiving when taking these tests, like old people and young people in relationships, or just having a conversation. There's a lot of different things that can go with that, which makes that one kind of hard to be reliable. My last test that I took was the Native versus white Americans. My results for this last test indicated that I had a slight automatic preference for white Americans than natives. 59% of participants had a slight or strong bias over white Americans than natives, which I found was very interesting. Now, finally, going back to the discussion, which I saved for last, are implicit association tests reliable and valid? IITs can be reliable and valid for general study. However, these type of tests are reliable to a certain extent. The tests determine predictable behaviors, but it isn't meant to be results you depend on and can be butthurt about them. Just because I associate men with careers doesn't mean I necessarily think women should do household chores and be stay-at-home wives. So, they're not reliable enough to use professionally in legal cases. They might serve a good general bias for psychologists, but in the end, they can't be used for anything other than general biases and studying general biases. So, with that, after looking at my research, I have concluded that IITs may be reliable to a certain extent, but in the end and in the big picture, they are not reliable or valid. Thank you for watching my last electronic poster. Thank you. Bye.